concert hall was quiet in a way that only happens between busy hours. The seats were empty, the stage lights were dim, and the air still carried a soft smell of cleaning spray mixed with old wood and polished floors. It was late afternoon, the time when rehearsals had ended and evening events had not yet begun. Most people had already left, thinking nothing special would happen in these silent hours. A woman moved slowly across the wide floor with her cleaning cart. She had been working there for years, always arriving early and leaving late, always careful not to disturb anyone important. Her work was simple but tiring. She cleaned floors, wiped chairs, and made sure the hall looked perfect for people who would later sit and enjoy music they could afford. She never complained. She needed the job and she did it with quiet pride. Not far from her, her daughter sat on a bench near the wall. The girl was used to waiting. She waited almost every day, after school or during weekends, while her mother finished work. She knew how to stay quiet, how to stay out of the way, and how to make herself small in places that were not meant for her. She carried a small bag with notebooks and a bottle of water. Sometimes she did homework. Sometimes she just watched. That day she watched the stage. The piano stood there, large and dark, resting under soft light. It had been played by many skilled hands over the years. Famous performers had sat there, people whose names appeared on posters and tickets. The girl did not know their names well, but she knew their sounds. She had heard rehearsals many times, hiding behind doors or sitting quietly in the back. Music had become part of her daily life, even though it did not belong to her world. Her mother noticed her staring. "Just a little longer," the woman said gently, without stopping her work. The girl nodded. She always nodded. She understood that rules were different for them. Touching things that did not belong to them was not allowed. Asking questions was risky. Being noticed was something to avoid. The hall grew even quieter. The last staff members walked out, talking softly among themselves. The heavy doors closed, leaving behind a stillness that felt deep and almost personal. The girl shifted on the bench. Her eyes kept returning to the piano. She had touched a piano before, but only briefly. At a friend's house once. At school during a short music class. Never like this. Never one this big, this serious. Still, she felt something pulling her toward it. It was not a thought she could explain. It was more like a feeling that had been waiting inside her for a long time. She stood up slowly. Her mother was busy wiping the lower rows of seats and did not notice at first. The girl took careful steps toward the stage, her shoes making almost no sound. Each step felt heavy, not because of fear, but because she knew she was crossing an invisible line. This was not her place. Everyone had made that clear in many small ways over the years. She climbed the short steps to the stage and stopped. For a moment, she simply stood there, looking at the piano up close. The surface reflected light, and she could see her own face in it, slightly bent and unclear. Her hands trembled a little. She told herself she would just sit, just look, nothing more. She sat down on the bench. The piano keys were cool under her fingers. She did not press them yet. She closed her eyes for a second, taking a slow breath. In her mind, sounds began to form. She remembered pieces she had heard many times during rehearsals. She did not know their names, but she knew how they felt. Soft parts, strong parts, moments that made her chest feel tight for reasons she could never explain. She pressed one key. The sound echoed through the empty hall. It was clear and gentle, like a question being asked. She froze, listening to how the note traveled, how it filled the space and came back to her. No one shouted. No one rushed in. The world did not end. She pressed another key, then another. Soon, her fingers began to move with more confidence. Not because she believed she was allowed, but because something deeper had taken over. She played slowly at first, letting each sound settle. The music was simple, but it was honest, carried something real, shaped by listening, feeling, and remembering. Her mother looked up. At first, the woman felt fear. Her heart jumped, and she dropped the cloth she was holding. She saw her daughter on the stage and rushed forward, ready to pull her away and apologize to whoever might be watching. But then she stopped. She listened. The music did not sound like noise or random pressing. It sounded calm, thoughtful, full of care. The woman had never heard her daughter play like that before. She knew the girl loved music, but this was different. This was not a child playing around. This was something else. The woman stayed where she was, torn between fear and pride. Her hands shook as she held onto the cleaning cart. She watched her daughter's back, small and straight, sitting in a place where she had never imagined her before. The girl continued playing. She was no longer aware of the hall or the rules or the risk. She was following the sound inside her, letting it guide her fingers. Her face was calm, almost peaceful. The music grew stronger, then softer again, like breathing. Somewhere near the entrance, a door opened quietly. A man who had forgotten his jacket stepped back inside. He stopped the moment he heard the music. He stood still, listening, confused. He looked around, expecting to see a professional rehearsing. Instead, he saw a small figure at the piano and a cleaner standing frozen near the seats. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply listened. The girl reached the end of a short piece and let her hands rest in her lap. The final note hung in the air before fading away. For a moment, everything was silent again. Her heart beat fast. She suddenly remembered where she was and what she had done. She stood up quickly, ready to run back to the bench. Her eyes searched for her mother, fear filling them. But before she could take a step, she heard something unexpected. Someone clapped. It was soft at first, one pair of hands. Then another sound followed, a quiet voice saying, "Where did that come from?" The girl froze. Her mother stepped forward, her voice shaking as she began to apologize, already expecting anger or blame. But no one raised their voice. No one told them to leave. Instead, more people had entered the hall, drawn in by the sound they had heard from the hallway. The girl stood beside the piano, unsure of what to do next, unaware that this small moment, born out of silence and curiosity, was about to change everything. The sound of the piano had lingered longer than anyone expected. The small audience that had gathered at the entrance of the hall could not take their eyes off the girl. She looked so calm, so ordinary, yet the music that came from her fingers was far from ordinary. Each note seemed to carry a story, a memory, a feeling that made the hall feel alive in a way it had not for a long time. People whispered softly among themselves. No one wanted to break the spell. The girl did not notice them at first. She was focused, her mind and hands working together in a rhythm that came naturally. The music grew slightly louder, richer, more confident. It was no longer just small notes floating in the empty space. It was a melody that demanded attention, a melody that drew people closer without a single word. Her mother stood near the back of the hall, gripping her cleaning cart, unsure if she should speak or remain silent. She felt a mix of pride and fear. She had seen her daughter play at home, in the quiet of their small apartment, but this was different. The piano in this hall was large, powerful, meant for skilled hands. And yet, here was her daughter, filling the room with music as if she had belonged there all her life. One of the staff members who had returned to grab a forgotten folder stopped in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, barely breathing. He had seen many talented musicians come and go, but there was something in this girl's playing that was different. It was not about technique or perfection. It was about feeling. Every note was precise, but it carried emotion that made the listener lean forward instinctively. Another man, a musician who had been practicing in a nearby studio, heard the sound from the hall. Curiosity pulled him out of his practice. He opened the door slowly, and when he saw the girl, he froze. He had played on stages across the world, performed for large audiences, and yet the music before him made him pause in awe. He whispered to himself, trying not to disturb the moment. Each note she played was full of life, and her fingers moved with confidence and grace. The girl continued playing, unaware of the growing crowd. She moved from one melody to another, guided only by what she felt inside. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was not thinking about skill or judgment. She was letting the music flow naturally, letting it tell the story she had always carried in her heart. The hall, usually empty at this hour, seemed to breathe with her. Her mother could no longer contain herself. She stepped forward slightly, wanting to protect her daughter, but also feeling a strange joy she could not put into words. She realized that this was more than talent. This was a gift. Her daughter had been given something that could touch people deeply, something rare and precious. Yet she still worried. What if people judged her for being a child of a cleaner? What if they did not understand? Meanwhile, the man who had paused at the door could not move. His mind raced as he listened to the music. He had heard many performers, many pianists, but there was a purity here that he could not ignore. He noticed the way her fingers danced lightly over the keys, the way her posture was relaxed yet focused, and the subtle way she expressed every emotion through sound. He stepped closer, making sure he did not disrupt her. The crowd outside the doorway had grown slightly. One by one, people had returned to see what had caused the music to drift down the hall. Some were cleaners, some were staff members, some were young musicians practicing nearby. Each person stopped, amazed at the sound coming from the small figure at the piano. They whispered quietly, careful not to break the magic of the moment. The girl transitioned to a new melody. It was slower, gentler, filled with longing and warmth. She had learned pieces by listening, by observing others, and by imagining the sounds she wanted to create. This melody told a story without words, a story of quiet hope and deep emotion. It wrapped around the listeners, making them forget the world outside the hall. Even the woman who had just entered to fetch her coat stood still, captivated. Her mother watched her daughter's face. She could see the focus, the concentration, and the joy that came with it. She realized that all the hours of listening, of practicing alone in secret, had led to this moment. Her daughter had taken something ordinary, a piano, an empty hall, a quiet afternoon, and turned it into something extraordinary. And she had done it without fear, without expectation, without even realizing how special she was. The sound drew the attention of another musician who had been leaving the building. He turned back, curiosity overcoming his schedule. As he approached, he felt a wave of surprise and admiration. The girl's music was not just competent. It was expressive, emotional, and precise in a way that could only come from someone who felt it deeply. Her fingers moved almost effortlessly, as if they had been guided by something beyond practice or lessons. The hall began to fill quietly. No one shouted or pushed. People simply appeared, drawn by the sound, as if the music had a pull stronger than any spoken invitation. The girl, still unaware of her growing audience, continued to play. She moved from gentle melodies to faster, more intricate ones, each note carefully considered yet flowing naturally. The room was alive with sound, echoing off the walls, carrying her story to everyone present. Her mother felt tears form in her eyes. She could not remember ever being so proud. This was a moment she would never forget, a moment that proved her daughter's determination, her patience, and her love for music. Yet she also felt nervous. Would this attention overwhelm her daughter? Would it bring unwanted pressure? She took a deep breath and decided to simply watch, to let her daughter be herself. One of the artists who had returned after hearing whispers from the hallway stepped closer. He did not introduce himself or speak. He simply watched, listening carefully. He noticed the subtle dynamics in the playing, the way each note was weighted with care, the way she paused just enough to create suspense, the way she let the music breathe naturally. He was impressed, and yet he felt something deeper. There was a soulfulness in her playing that could not be taught. The girl moved to a final piece, one she had created herself in her mind over months of quiet practice. It was delicate, almost fragile, yet filled with emotion. Her hands glided over the keys with ease, and the melody seemed to fill every corner of the hall. The small audience held their breath, afraid to break the spell. Each note seemed to tell them a story, not with words, but with feeling, memory, and heart. When she finished, she let her hands rest on the keys. The final note faded slowly, leaving a silence that felt sacred. For a long moment no one moved. Then, softly, a single clap broke the silence. Another followed, and soon the hall was filled with gentle applause. It was not loud or overwhelming, but it carried warmth, admiration, and respect. The girl stood up, startled, her eyes wide. She had not realized anyone had been listening so closely. Her mother rushed forward, wrapping her arms around her, trying to calm the mixture of excitement and fear she saw in her daughter's eyes. The small audience stepped forward, offering smiles, quiet words of praise, and looks of astonishment. One of the musicians, still standing near the back, spoke first. "That was incredible," he said softly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The girl blinked, unsure how to answer. She had learned by listening, by imagining, by feeling. She had not learned in classrooms or from formal lessons. Her life had been ordinary, quiet, and often unnoticed. And yet here she was, filling a hall with music that moved people deeply. Her mother held her hand and smiled gently. She did not speak, allowing her daughter to experience the moment in her own way. The girl realized that this was more than just a performance. This was a turning point. She had crossed a line from being unseen to being noticed, not through luck, but through her own quiet persistence and love for music. The hall remained filled with people who could not believe what they had just witnessed. Artists, staff members, and passers-by exchanged glances, sharing silent agreement that something extraordinary had just happened. They would talk about it later, remember it later, but for now, they simply admired the girl and her music. The girl took a deep breath, letting the applause and whispers wash over her. She realized that she had shared something important, something that could not be taken back. The music had connected her to people she did not know, to strangers who had suddenly become witnesses to her talent, to her heart. And in that connection, she found a quiet sense of fulfillment, a feeling that she had finally stepped into a space where her gift could be seen, appreciated, and understood. The hall had grown alive with quiet excitement. People who had wandered in, drawn by the music, now stood in small groups, whispering to each other. Their faces reflected amazement and curiosity. They had expected a short performance, perhaps a child trying out some notes, but what they witnessed was far beyond anything ordinary. Every note told a story. Every chord revealed emotion that seemed older than the girl herself. The girl's mother remained near the back, her hands still gripping the cleaning cart. She had moved a step closer, allowing herself to watch her daughter from a distance, unsure of what would come next. Pride mixed with worry in her chest. She could see the talent, the passion, the sheer gift of her daughter, but she also knew how fragile such moments could be. They were rare, unexpected, and fleeting. Among the crowd were a few people she recognized as professional musicians. They had returned to the hall after hearing the faint sounds from outside. They had expected to see something ordinary, but they were greeted with something extraordinary. One of them, a man with a worn violin case slung over his shoulder, whispered to a colleague, unable to hide his astonishment. He had played in renowned halls and with famous orchestras, but he had rarely felt a music so pure, so instinctively moving. The girl continued to play, still unaware of the attention she was attracting. She moved effortlessly from one melody to another, her hands gliding over the keys, sometimes delicate, sometimes strong, always expressive. Her playing was not flawless in a technical sense, but it did not need to be. Each note, each pause, each subtle shift carried feeling. The hall absorbed the music, echoing it softly back, amplifying the connection between her and the listeners. Her mother could not help but step a little closer. She wanted to protect her daughter, to guide her if needed, but she also knew that this moment was something her daughter had to experience fully on her own. So she stayed at the edge, careful not to interrupt, careful not to speak. She watched the transformation of the room as more people entered quietly, drawn by whispers or the lingering sound of the piano. A young musician, carrying a sheet music folder, approached from the back. He had been practicing in a side room and had paused when he heard the music drifting through the corridors. He stopped just inside the doorway, mesmerized. He leaned slightly forward, listening, noticing how the girl's fingers seemed to anticipate each note before it was played. He watched her posture, the way she seemed connected to the instrument and to the music in a way that transcended formal lessons or theory. The audience began to shift subtly. People moved closer, their steps careful and almost reverent. They did not want to startle the girl, nor did they want to break the spell. The air was filled with anticipation, the kind of anticipation that builds slowly and quietly but never lets go. Everyone in the hall, from staff to professional musicians, felt that they were witnessing something rare, something they would remember for years. The girl transitioned into a piece that she had pieced together from bits of songs she had heard over the years. She had never formally learned it, but she remembered the sounds, the feelings, the pauses. She stitched them together intuitively, letting memory and emotion guide her hands. The melody was soft at first, almost fragile, but it grew steadily, gaining strength without losing its tenderness. The hall responded to every note, every phrase, almost as if it were alive. Her mother's heart swelled with emotion. She had spent years watching her daughter practice quietly, alone, in a tiny apartment, without recognition, without applause. And now, here she was, filling an empty hall with music that touched people deeply. The pride was overwhelming, but so was the fear. Fear that such a moment could be fleeting, that the recognition might be too much for her daughter at once. She reminded herself to stay calm, to simply let her daughter shine. The young musician with the folder had moved closer, now standing near the stage steps. He had seen many talented performers, but this was different. There was no showmanship, no pretense, no desire for applause. The girl played for herself, guided by feeling, and in doing so, she connected with everyone who listened. The melody shifted slightly, adding a hint of improvisation, a personal touch that made it unique. The musician could not help but feel a deep respect for her intuition and natural talent. More people entered quietly, and the hall began to feel less empty, more alive. A janitor, returning to collect a mop, paused at the doorway. A receptionist who had stayed late to finish paperwork peeked in. Even a security guard, usually focused on routine, stopped to listen. The music had a magnetic quality, drawing in those who had not intended to be part of the moment. They whispered to each other, exchanging glances, sharing awe in silence. The girl continued, her confidence growing with each note. She played a series of chords that rose and fell like waves, filling the hall with rhythm and emotion. She had not rehearsed in front of anyone before, yet she played as if she had always been meant to perform here. The audience felt the honesty of her music. There was no pretense, no calculated technique, just a young girl expressing her heart and soul. Her mother stepped closer again, her eyes moist with unshed tears. She saw the transformation in her daughter, the way she had moved from nervous curiosity to full expression, fully immersed in the music. She realized that this was more than a talent. It was a calling, something that had been inside her daughter all along, waiting for the right moment to be seen and heard. The violinist and other musicians in the hall exchanged quiet comments. They had encountered prodigies before, but this was unusual. The depth, the intuition, the emotional understanding, it was rare even among trained professionals. Some wondered if this girl had ever had formal lessons. But when they glanced at her mother and realized the child had likely learned by observation and instinct, their admiration grew. The girl transitioned into a faster, more energetic piece. Her fingers moved with remarkable agility, yet they never rushed. Each note landed with intention, each phrase carried meaning. The music had a rhythm that seemed to pulse naturally, as if her body and mind were perfectly in sync with the instrument. The hall seemed to vibrate with energy, capturing the attention of everyone present. People began to clap quietly at the end of short passages, careful not to interrupt the flow. Encouragement was offered in soft murmurs and nods of appreciation. The girl, though absorbed in her playing, noticed these responses and smiled subtly, a small acknowledgement that she could feel the presence and admiration around her. Her mother's chest tightened with emotion. She had always known her daughter had something special, but seeing it unfold in such a public yet intimate way was overwhelming. She could see the mixture of excitement and nervousness in her daughter's eyes, but also the pure joy of expressing herself fully. The mother understood that this moment was not just about music. It was about recognition, connection, and the first step toward a larger world. A few of the professional musicians began to approach, drawn by curiosity and a growing sense of admiration. They did not rush or demand attention. They simply listened, absorbing the nuances of her playing. One whispered to another, marveling at the intuition, the emotional depth, the natural phrasing. They recognized that here was a talent not yet nurtured by formal education but blossoming through pure passion and dedication. The girl's final piece was a combination of melodies she had learned and ones she had imagined herself. It was delicate and expressive, each note carrying a piece of her story. The hall was silent again, everyone holding their breath, captivated by the music's honesty and power. When she finished, the last note lingered, fading slowly into a hushed, reverent quiet. The silence was followed by soft, deliberate applause. A few clapped first, then others joined quietly, creating a ripple of appreciation that grew steadily. The girl stepped back from the piano, unsure how to respond. Her mother came forward, embracing her gently, whispering words of reassurance and pride. The girl realized that something had shifted. She had been seen, truly seen for the first time, and it was a feeling unlike any other. The hall remained filled with people who could not believe what they had just experienced. Some spoke quietly among themselves, sharing their astonishment. Others simply smiled, absorbing the moment, knowing they had witnessed something rare. The girl's mother felt a deep sense of gratitude. Her daughter's courage, patience, and love for music had led to this moment, and she understood that this was only the beginning of a journey that could take her daughter far beyond the quiet hall she had always known. The hall remained quiet for a few moments after the applause, the sound slowly fading into the polished walls and empty corners. The girl stepped back from the piano, her hands still tingling from the last notes she had played. She looked around, noticing for the first time the people who had gathered to listen. Their faces were kind, curious, and full of appreciation, not the judgment or dismissal she had expected. She felt a strange mixture of relief and nervousness, unsure how to process the attention she had just received. Her mother moved closer, taking her hand in hers, and whispered words of encouragement. She had never seen her daughter so exposed and yet so natural. She could feel the pride radiating from her chest, mixed with a protective instinct she could not ignore. She knew that this moment, born from curiosity and quiet determination, might open doors, but she also knew that the world could be harsh to those who had been unnoticed for so long. Among the small crowd, the professional musicians began to step forward. One of them, an older pianist, spoke first, his voice soft but carrying authority. "That was extraordinary," he said. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The girl blinked, caught off guard. She had never considered that anyone would be curious about her learning process. She had learned by listening, by imagining, and by practicing in quiet moments when no one could see her. There were no formal lessons, no teachers guiding her. She looked at her mother, who gave a small nod, signaling that it was okay to speak. I listened," the girl said quietly. "I listened to people play, and I tried to remember. I practiced when I could." The pianist smiled gently. "And it shows. You have something rare, something that comes from feeling and understanding music in a way that cannot be taught." He gestured to the others who had gathered. "We would like to talk to you, if you are willing." The girl's mother tightened her grip on her hand, nervous but trusting her daughter's instinct. The girl nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of excitement and fear. She had never imagined that her private, quiet practice could lead to recognition, let alone interest from professional musicians. The reality was both thrilling and intimidating. The musicians took their time, speaking softly and asking questions, trying not to overwhelm her. They wanted to understand how she had learned, how she had developed such a natural sense of rhythm and expression without formal guidance. The girl answered as best she could, her words simple but honest. She spoke of the afternoons she had spent listening to rehearsals from the back of the hall, of the evenings she had quietly practiced on an old keyboard at home, and of the feelings that guided her hands more than any instructions. One of the musicians, A woman with a violin tucked under her arm knelt slightly to meet the girl's gaze. "You have an incredible gift," she said. "Most people spend years in lessons and never develop what you have naturally. Have you ever thought about performing more? Or studying music formally?" The girl shook her head gently. She had always loved music, but she had never imagined a path beyond the small hall she visited with her mother, beyond the quiet moments when she could play unnoticed. The idea of studying or performing seemed both exciting and frightening, a world completely different from the one she knew. Her mother spoke softly, careful not to interrupt. "We have always encouraged her to follow her passion quietly," she said, "but we have never known how far it could go. We wanted her to enjoy music, not feel pressured." The older pianist nodded. "Pressure is not what we want. We want a guide, to support, to help her grow in a safe way. Talent like this should be nurtured carefully. It should not be rushed, but it should not be ignored either." The conversation continued, gentle and respectful. The musicians were fascinated, but they were also careful not to overwhelm the girl or her mother. They spoke of opportunities, of guidance, of mentorship, all in terms that allowed the girl to remain comfortable and grounded. They wanted to offer her a chance to grow, not to change who she was or take away the joy she found in music. As the discussion unfolded, the girl's mother realized that this moment was more than recognition. It was a doorway to possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Her daughter, once a quiet observer of music, could now step into a world where her gift could be shared more widely, where her talent could be developed with care and respect. And yet, she knew it was essential to maintain the balance between nurturing and protecting, between opportunity and pressure. The musicians decided to stay a little longer, listening as the girl played another piece, this time a melody she had created herself. Her confidence had grown, and the music flowed more freely than before. Each note was deliberate, each chord a reflection of her feelings. The hall, now filled with attentive listeners, seemed to come alive in response. The atmosphere was gentle yet electric, charged with admiration and wonder. The girl's mother watched silently, feeling a profound mix of emotions. Pride, relief, and hope swirled together. She had witnessed her daughter's private passion transform into something visible and impactful, a moment that could shape the future. She also felt protective, knowing that the sudden attention could bring challenges. But for now, she allowed herself to simply observe and trust in her daughter's instinct and integrity. The musicians took notes quietly, exchanged glances, and whispered softly among themselves. They were impressed not only by her technical ability but by the depth of understanding and emotional connection she had with the piano. One of them remarked quietly, "It is rare to see someone who plays from the heart and the mind with such natural balance." As the afternoon turned into early evening, the hall slowly emptied of other staff and late visitors. The musicians remained, continuing to speak with the girl and her mother. They suggested small steps to guide her growth, such as short lessons with a trusted teacher, opportunities to play in controlled settings, and ways to explore her talent without losing the joy she already found in music. The approach was gentle and patient, designed to support, not pressure. The girl listened carefully, absorbing the information while still holding on to the quiet joy she felt when playing. She realized that this was not about fame or attention. It was about understanding her own abilities, exploring her potential, and connecting with people through music in meaningful ways. The presence of supportive adults who respected her pace gave her confidence that this path could be navigated safely. Her mother felt a deep sense of gratitude toward the musicians. Their respect, patience, and encouragement were exactly what she had hoped for, and their recognition of her daughter's natural gift gave her a sense of relief and optimism. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine the future not just in terms of survival, but in terms of growth, opportunity, and fulfillment. As they prepared to leave the hall, the girl sat at the piano one last time for the day. She played a simple, quiet melody, a reflection of her feelings and the new possibilities ahead. The musicians listened in silence, absorbing the purity and honesty of each note. When she finished, she stood, feeling a sense of completion and readiness. She understood that this was only the beginning, that her journey had just begun, but that it could now be guided with care, respect, and opportunity. The mother took her hand, and together they walked toward the exit, leaving the hall filled with echoes of music, admiration, and hope. The girl glanced back once at the piano, feeling a quiet connection to the instrument that had been both a friend and a guide. She knew that her path would be shaped by her love for music, by her instinct, and by the support of those who had recognized her talent without pressure or judgment. And in that moment, she felt a quiet sense of anticipation, ready to explore the possibilities that awaited. The following days were quiet but full of change. The girl returned to her normal routine, going to school, helping her mother at home, and practicing piano when she could. But the memory of that afternoon in the hall lingered. It had shifted something inside her. She felt a sense of confidence she had never felt before, a sense that her music could reach people in ways she had only imagined. It was a mixture of excitement and calm determination. Her mother noticed the change immediately. The girl walked taller, spoke with more assurance, and carried a quiet sense of purpose. They still lived simply, still managed their daily routines, but the bond between them felt deeper. The mother realized that her daughter was beginning to step into a larger world, one where her talent could be nurtured and appreciated. Yet she also understood that this world could be complicated and that their approach had to be careful, gentle, and patient. The musicians who had visited the hall kept in touch. They offered guidance, shared resources, and suggested opportunities that would not overwhelm her. Lessons were arranged with teachers who understood the importance of supporting natural ability without extinguishing curiosity or joy. The girl approached each session with eagerness, learning new techniques and ideas while still relying on her own instinct and emotional connection to music. She discovered that structure could enhance creativity without limiting it. Word of her talent spread slowly. Friends at school began to notice her quiet confidence, though few understood the full scope of her abilities. Her mother remained protective, sharing information carefully and allowing the girl to maintain control over how she presented herself. This balance helped the girl stay grounded, preventing attention from becoming pressure. She was still a child who loved music for the love of music, not for recognition or approval. At home, evenings were filled with quiet practice. The girl experimented with melodies, sometimes repeating familiar pieces, other times creating entirely new ones. Her mother would sit nearby, folding laundry or preparing meals, listening to the music as it flowed through their small apartment. They often spoke about what music meant to them, about feelings, stories, and moments they wanted to express. The piano became not only a source of skill and performance but also a medium for communication, reflection, and comfort. Occasionally, her mother would hear soft knocks at their door or see messages from teachers or musicians suggesting small, safe opportunities to play in public. Each time, she discussed it with her daughter carefully, allowing her to make choices rather than imposing decisions. This respect strengthened the girl's confidence and reinforced the idea that her music was hers to shape. She learned responsibility alongside her talent, understanding that every opportunity required thought and care. The girl's confidence grew in small but meaningful ways. She began performing at local events designed for young musicians, with audiences who appreciated talent without judgment. The first few performances were nerve-wracking, but she approached each with preparation, reflection, and the instinctive understanding she had developed from years of listening and practicing. Each performance became a moment of connection, a way to share emotion and story through sound. Her mother remained a constant support, always present but never overbearing. She understood that guidance and encouragement mattered more than control. Together, they navigated schedules, lessons, and performances with patience and understanding. The girl's growth was steady and genuine, a product of natural talent nurtured by care and dedication. Teachers noticed her intuitive grasp of music and encouraged her to explore composition alongside performance. She began creating small pieces, simple yet emotionally rich, inspired by everyday life, memories, and feelings she could not always put into words. Each composition was a reflection of her journey, a record of experiences both ordinary and extraordinary. She began to understand that music was not just about playing notes, but about expressing ideas and emotions in a way that connected with others. As she gained experience, the girl became more aware of her own progress. She listened to recordings, reflected on her playing, and experimented with new techniques. She learned patience, discipline, and self-awareness, but never lost the joy and instinct that had defined her earliest experiences with the piano. The combination of natural talent and thoughtful development allowed her to grow without losing herself in the process. The quiet fame she had gained did not overwhelm her. People recognized her skill, but she remained grounded, focused on music as a form of expression rather than a source of praise. Her mother's guidance, the careful mentorship of teachers, and her own instinctive understanding of music helped her maintain balance. She learned to navigate attention, expectation, and opportunity without fear, embracing each moment with clarity and humility. One afternoon, she returned to the same hall where her talent had first been noticed. It had been months since the initial moment, and the hall now felt familiar in a different way. She sat at the piano, letting her fingers touch the keys gently. The music flowed naturally as it always had, but now she understood the depth of connection it could create. She thought of the people who had listened that first day, the musicians who had guided her, and the journey that had begun with curiosity and courage. Her mother stood quietly at the back, smiling softly. She had watched her daughter grow from a quiet, unnoticed child into a young musician with talent, confidence, and understanding. She knew the journey was ongoing, that challenges and choices lay ahead, but she also knew that her daughter had the resilience, passion, and guidance to navigate it. In that moment, the hall felt alive not just with music but with the promise of what was to come. The girl played for some time, exploring melodies, experimenting with emotion, and reflecting her experiences through sound. She felt a sense of calm and fulfillment. She understood that talent was not only about being noticed or celebrated but also about the ability to touch lives, to communicate, and to grow in ways that were meaningful and authentic. The piano had been a friend, a guide, and a companion throughout her journey, and she felt a profound gratitude for every moment it had offered. As she finished, she looked at her mother and smiled. There was understanding in that smile, a recognition that the journey was shared, that every quiet practice, every note played in secret, had led to this point. The applause from a few staff members who had come to listen was gentle but genuine. It was a quiet acknowledgement of a journey well begun, a talent nurtured with care, and a young life filled with promise. Walking out of the hall together, mother and daughter felt the weight of possibilities and the lightness of newfound confidence. The world outside was unchanged, ordinary, and bustling, but inside them, something had shifted. The girl had discovered not just her gift but the ways in which it could grow, connect, and transform. She had learned to balance attention with humility, opportunity with instinct, and ambition with patience. Life returned to its routines, but with new meaning. School, home, and practice continued, each infused with a quiet sense of purpose. The piano remained a central part of her life, a space for discovery, reflection, and expression. Each day brought small steps forward, moments of learning, and experiences that built confidence. She understood that her journey was ongoing, a continuous process of growth guided by talent, instinct, and support. In time, the girl became known to a wider circle of musicians and audiences, always approached carefully and respectfully. Each opportunity was chosen thoughtfully, with guidance from those who had recognized her gift and from her mother, who continued to provide grounding and support. The attention never overshadowed the joy of music itself, and the girl maintained a sense of wonder and humility that had defined her earliest experiences. Through it all, the bond between mother and daughter grew stronger. They navigated each new step together, celebrating accomplishments, learning from challenges, and maintaining a sense of balance. Music remained their shared language, a medium through which they communicated love, understanding, and support. The girl's talent flourished, guided by instinct, dedication, and the careful nurturing of those who understood her needs. And so, what began as a quiet moment in an empty hall became the foundation for a life shaped by music, connection, and growth. The girl learned that true talent is not only about skill but about courage, curiosity, and the willingness to embrace opportunities with integrity and care. The piano, once a simple instrument, had become a gateway to a world filled with possibility, discovery, and the quiet joy of expression. She knew that her journey was just beginning, but she faced it with confidence, hope, and the understanding that every note played, every melody explored, was a step toward a meaningful and fulfilling future.